You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of Zesty Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes. Why, hello there, friends. This is Megan here. I have such a treat for you today. I am so excited. I got to interview Pam. Pam is the Chief Science Officer at Neurogistics, and as many of you know, we use the Neurogistics as a neurotransmitter test. It's a urine test. We use it inside of our Healthy Hormones 12-week group program alongside the Dutch, the dried urine test for comprehensive hormones. And we have found this combo to be the magic combo. Honestly, when I first was working one-on-one with women and I started adding in the neurotransmitter testing because it wasn't a part of what I used in the very beginning, when I added it, it was magical. It was like women were starting to feel that things were really lining up and there was a lot of symptom relief and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm finally sleeping. And so I think this is a huge component of why we're so successful in helping women with their hormone health. And Pam also found that she found women couldn't balance their hormones until their HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, was in better shape and that the brain was balanced. So she has seen the same thing over the years. So we talk with Pam about how do we get our neurotransmitters in the first place, and what is the role of stress with your neurotransmitters, and then also what can you do to improve them, and how does your diet play into that. She has a little tip in there about chicken, which I thought was funny. And also just want to let you know that we're coming up here really soon. February 9th is the next group start of our Healthy Hormones group. We only offer this twice a year, and we are starting very soon, and we have some spots open. So if you want to come on over to zestyginger.com/healthy hormones and grab a spot, we would love to work with you, and we can't wait to get started. So here we go to the interview. Okay, welcome everybody back to the 4-Phase Cycle podcast. I have Pam with me here, the Chief Science Officer at Neurogistics. Welcome, Pam.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
I am very excited for this conversation. So, Pam, let's see. We've been using your test, your neurotransmitter test now for probably 7 years and 5 or 6 in our groups. And honestly, it's one of my favorite tests. And I think it's the one that the ladies we work with are like, oh, thank you for finding this. So I'm excited to dig into this with you. And can you just start by telling our audience a little bit about how you got into this field and the lab and a little backstory?
Sure. So I was a wellness director at a pharmacy group in a compounding pharmacy in Austin. And we had so many people failing medication therapy. And having spent some time growing up in Europe, I knew that things were done a lot differently over there. So I just started really investigating, like, how can we help people with depression and anxiety that they just weren't getting better. And so I found a German researcher that was had printed some articles on neurotransmitters in urine, and they were originally using it for a really horrible cancer that you don't want to get, but they started realizing that it had other applications. And so it was brought to the United States, and then we brought it to Texas, and it just made a world of difference. In the beginning, we didn't know what the data meant, but after a while, you could look at them and go, wow, this person's depressed. This one can't focus. This one's probably having sleep cycle disorders. And so we really consider it a great starting point for what are you going to work on now? So it's been a really great change for clients to be able to look at a reflection of their brain and their gut for that matter.
Right. That's one of the things I love about the test is that although you're looking at certain neurotransmitter levels, there's all these ratios and there's all these clues. And I love sometimes on the lab work, it'll say something like eggs might be a problem for this person, right? Because you've had so many people come through that you've seen commonalities and you are getting really, really deep clues because of that.
Data is everything, right? And if you see enough of it, it's really wonderful to go, wow, we have seen so many people that have these super high dopamine levels that are allergic to eggs. I love that example because that's a very common one, and we see it a lot, particularly as we age. Our body is less tolerant of the things that we do to it, and so it's kind of interesting to watch those things happen, and then to see the way that your brain and your hormones respond to, hey, I don't like eating that, you know.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about how the neurotransmitters play into the role of hormone health or adrenal support, because I love somewhere in your presentation that you sent me was talking about how we can't basically just change behavior and habits when our brain chemistry is out of balance. So
Sure.
tell me a little bit more about how this plays into someone, for example, who's also wanting to, have a better cycle, balance their hormones, get rid of
Mhm.
PMS.
In the pharmacy group, we had all these folks that were continually changing their hormones, and they hadn't done the basics, like foundational type things, healing the gut, healing the brain. And I was talking to some colleagues, and they said, until they balance the brain, there's no way that the hormones are going to be balanced. Our brain has to tell every organ in the body what to do and every muscle when to move, right? So it's vitally important that we heal the brain, that we have the nutrients that it needs, and that it's balanced so that the communication is accurate. So if you have, very high stimulating neurotransmitters and low calming neurotransmitters, it's going to be a very mixed message to all of your endocrine organs when to release hormones. And it affects the gut. So is the gut's out of balance, the brain's out of balance, but if the brain's out of balance, the gut's out of balance. So it's really, I always look at an imbalanced body like a car with four flat tires. We can't fix just one. We have to put some air in all four of those tires to really get where we want to go.
Oh, I love that analogy. That's great. So, what have you seen shifting during the quarantine and pandemic? Because we have seen a
Mhm.
shift just even in our last couple healthy hormones groups where we usually see a certain level of progress, right? There's a certain,
Right.
and there's always people who need more help. There's always people who go really quickly. And it's been slow and it's frustrating. And at the same time, they can see, like, okay, well, at least I'm not going backwards like all of my other friends are, right? Like, at least I'm supporting to a certain point, but we've never had a situation like this before. What are you seeing shift in the numbers?
Boy, I tell you, we are seeing the adrenals, our stress response organs, are the levels are coming back so low because families are stressed. They're at home, they're trying to maintain their jobs and be school teachers, and not being able to see loved ones and hug them and release oxytocin like we should. And we're also not moving enough, so we're seeing body weights go up or not go down if someone's really working at it. And we're seeing the hormone levels for the adrenals not really improve. We're seeing them go down. This happened one other time, but not to such a great degree in 2008 when there was the big financial bust. We saw that on all of our executives. We could really see the impact, particularly on the men, which is, men don't always reach out for help, but that was a big time when we got a lot of them. We've also seen it in other countries when there's been major things happen, earthquakes, hurricanes that have taken them down, and we have a lot of adoptees, and we see the big shift there. So all of us tend to respond very much the same, and for the most part, we're not moving like we normally would. Gosh, I have my groceries delivered, but one of my favorite things to do is to go up and down the aisles and look at new healthy foods and read labels. And we don't do that as much. We're not going shopping. We're not going out to meet friends in the evening. I hope that we're all getting out and walking and exercising and doing some weightlifting, but it's just not the same. And our basal metabolic rate drops when stress is detected. We don't convert fat for energy at the same rate when our body says, when is the beast going to stop chasing us? We don't know when the stressor is going to go away.
Okay. So for someone who is in a place where they are eating, they're making sure to really focus on eating healthy foods, and they are moving and they're just feeling stuck, that's when looking at the brain chemistry can give them some clues, right, into how to get them out of that continuous fight or flight state.
Absolutely. You can support those neurotransmitters that are suffering, and maybe even do a combination of, testing, support, and then finding some other stress management skills that'll happen. I've been encouraging, our families, think about a little bit of yoga, do some additional things to really support the amount of stress, because, it's difficult. You turn on the news and it's a stressful situation in the country. We have people out of work, and then also, trying to just maintain and be on our devices. Being on your devices all day long is exhausting for your brain chemistry, because we overexcrete dopamine to such a big degree when we're getting all that blue light.
Oh, that's such a good point, Pam, because we've had women in our group say after they've done the neurotransmitter protocol, and a lot of them, their dopamine is a lot higher than their serotonin, and we're trying to help them switch that
Mhm.
ratio. And they'll say to me, "Oh, I didn't realize that I was reaching for my phone, right, for that dopamine hit," because as their
Right.
brain chemistry leveled out, they weren't having that same desire to
Mhm.
jump onto it.
It's kind of the same. I always akin it to when your brain is balanced. Like, I can remember the first time I always start with myself. I need to know what it feels like to take the amino acids, what it feels like to take a new supplement. And I remember walking to the refrigerator and opening it, like, out of habit. And I thought, I'm not hungry. And I shut the refrigerator. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to test my brain chemistry again because it's probably balanced. That was kind of the first stretch. And that's the same is true. We see it in kids who no longer throw themselves on the ground to do a temper tantrum. And so, we always have to blend that. I love it when women are self-reflective enough to go, wow, I don't have to pick that up. And if the gut's unhealthy and dopamine is over excreting because it's sending an alarm, well, then you do have to have more dopamine in order to have those good feelings, the endorphins and the joy that dopamine is supposed to bring us.
Right. Pam, I know you've worked a lot with children, and let's back all the way up to when we first get our neurotransmitters. So, can you talk about when we're born, right? We get them from our mom, or how does that work, and what's at play there of how we get set up to begin with?
Sure. So the balance of neurotransmitters begins in utero. So if the mom endures a trauma while she's pregnant, the loss of a family member, a terrible car wreck, things like that, the baby's brain may develop having an excitatory norm, or what we call homeostasis. And so that child's brain thinks that we have to be in fight or flight. That's our norm. So those babies are often born, they tend to be more colicky and not sleep. We get all of our neurotransmitters to start life with from our mom. So that's why it's so important to have healthy hormones, a great diet, a healthy gut, when we conceive. Sometimes we go, oops, we conceived, and we have to kind of play catch up. But then for the rest of our life, from the time that we're born until we die, the only way to make our neurotransmitters is through the proper digestion and breakdown of the proteins in our diet. So that's why some of the most unhealthy brains that I see are folks that are dieting and eating chicken, chicken, chicken. They're not doing nuts, seeds, beans, beef, different kinds of combinations. And so, children can have such big reactions. All you have to do is to walk into Target and have a really big meltdown with your kiddo, right? You're like, wow, how did they pull that off? I don't even have the energy to go into Target. But it's because they have this abundance of neurotransmitters that they received in utero. And and they have a lot more stomach acid and a lot more enzymes than we do. So when they pick something off the floor and stick it in their mouth, they don't get some terrible disease every time because their stomach acid is breaking down those bugs. So they can have, a goldfish diet and still get some nutrients out of it, versus as adults, when our stomach acid and enzymes fall off, we don't have the same ability to get those nutrients from our foods. But it is really important that we rotate those and kind of think about it. I know I always wondered, I really love chicken, and I couldn't figure out why my mom just wouldn't give me chicken every night, but she rotated it. And fortunately, it's not only to keep us interested, but it's to make our good brain chemicals.
That's funny about the chicken. I never thought about it that way. I got to see Pam exactly what you're saying. So I have two children, and one was before I found this work, and she led me to this work, and then one was after. And the one I tested that one when she had a bunch of stomach issues and things going on when she was little. So I tested her when she was 2. I had my neurotransmitter panel and I had hers, and they were exactly the same. Every imbalance, it was exactly the same. And it was, I could see, I'd passed on everything to her. And then by the time I got to 5 years later, had the second one, she didn't get any of that.
Right. Right. It's really amazing. We did a generational study a while back. I was really trying to chase down alcohol and drug addiction. And what we figured out, you had to have at least 5 children and 3 generations alive. And so the third generation needed the 5 kids. And so we were able to go back and look and see how much one child looked more like one parent or the other. And about 68% was fully identifiable. Every now and then with AB blood types, we got this kind of wild combination. The child was AB and neither parent was AB. And so those were the kind of the outliers. But it was really fascinating because, we do pass on those sensitivities to certain foods. And it's not all specifically genetic, but it's a gut that just doesn't digest something well. And so it's pretty fascinating to look at. I know when I got my first panel back, my parents live 5 doors down. They're elderly. And I went down there and I said, I want to thank you guys for my gluten and dairy sensitivity. And they were like, what? But it's true. We do pass those on. And I enjoy hearing that folks do go back and say, hey, mom, when did you start your period? Or at what point was menopause? All those kinds of things. And they'll go, our family doesn't do dairy well. So I like hearing that.
I love it. Pam, I'd love for you to just kind of talk through all the basic markers that you're looking at on your test. Just on your, like we use the NeuroFocus, for example, in
Mhm.
Healthy Hormones. And can you just talk about like what kind of information you're gathering from those and what you're looking at?
You bet. So serotonin is kind of known as our main mood neurotransmitter. When serotonin is inefficient, which is important, it can be high or low, right? It means you either don't have enough or you're excreting too much. You can have anxiety, depression, carbohydrate cravings, and actually a lack of energy. And we don't think about calming neurotransmitters playing a role with energy, but serotonin really does. If you think about someone that's having a mood issue or depressed, they don't really have the get up and go to say, get up and go work in the garden. So serotonin is so important. We make almost 95% of it in the GI tract. And that's why we talk so much about gut. And, you can urinate out your serotonin or you can absorb it and utilize it properly. We make neurotransmitters all over the body. We don't just make them in the brain. Most people think, oh, that's a brain issue. Well, we make neurotransmitters in the kidneys, the gut, gosh, all kinds of places. So serotonin works very closely with GABA, and GABA is everyone's favorite neurotransmitter. So if you have a glass of wine, you excrete some GABA and it relaxes you. So GABA is our calming neurotransmitters, neurotransmitter. It's medications that are for anxiety work on the GABA receptors. Um, it's important to note, though, that synthetic medications can't give you fresh neurotransmitters. They only redistribute what you already make from your dietary proteins. So serotonin, GABA are the calming guys that go out into the synapse and go, wait a minute, all you stimulating guys, you're not supposed to be here. And so they nullify that effect, but they can become depleted pretty quick. So dopamine, we've talked about a little bit. That's our main focus neurotransmitter. It's also a mood neurotransmitter like serotonin. It's reflective of our fight or flight response. So dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine respond every time you slam on your brakes on the freeway, or someone scares you in the hallway when it's dark and you didn't expect them to be there. Those guys all over-excrete. So you can imagine, with as stressful as our lives are right now, that there's a lot of dopamine, norepi, and epi being excreted. Now, other countries call norepinephrine and epinephrine noradrenaline and adrenaline. So we talk about adrenaline junkies, and I was running on adrenaline. So those two neurotransmitters, norepinephrine plays a role with focus, and epinephrine, it doesn't really play a role with focus, but definitely stress response, but they're excreted from our adrenals, which are the stress response organs that sit on top of the kidneys. And cortisol is excreted from there too. And so they respond, cortisol responds. Everybody likes to jump on the bandwagon to respond to stress and stimuli. And we are always looking at a ratio for those, because sometimes we have some genetic issues that prevent us from really converting neurotransmitters in the way that they should. So we do a ratio on that. Now, histamine is my favorite neurotransmitter to look at. I kind of start at the bottom of a panel and look up and go, wow, look at that great histamine. This brain is probably going to be relatively easy to balance, if they don't have a lot going on in the gut. But histamine is a stimulating neurotransmitter, and it's reflective of inflammation. So you think about how poorly you feel when you have a cold. So your histamine's really high. Vitamin C will bring that down a bit. You get a little bit clearer headed. But it's a really important neurotransmitter. A lot of folks are taking antihistamines, so it knocks down the histamine, but it doesn't knock down the inflammation that caused it to be so high. And then we talked about GABA, and then glutamate is the most excitatory, damaging neurotransmitter for the brain. So our brain will automatically make some of it, but we can eat it accidentally as a food additive, as monosodium glutamate or disodium glutamate. So it's always really important to read labels where you can. But in our country, in the United States, you can have MSG listed as natural colorings and flavorings. And so you can be getting a little bit, which is why it's just better to use your own spices and cook things the best that you can naturally. So those neurotransmitters all work in concert together, but those are the main markers that we look at. And we always do one marker, which is creatinine, because we want to make sure your kidneys are working right. If your kidneys are impaired due to diabetes or damage to the kidneys, occasionally, you won't make neurotransmitters properly. So we always look at creatinine too. It's not a neurotransmitter, but an important marker.
Oh, that brings up a good point, Pam, because I know we've had people ask before, well, don't your neurotransmitters change all the time? Isn't it dependent on what you eat? So explain how you are making that consistent on the testing.
You bet. So our neurotransmitters do change. They change according to the amount of stress that we endure, how much exercise we're getting. But the ratios between neurotransmitters don't change that often. It takes a period of time to affect a big change in them. So we test in the morning. We don't want you to have caffeine. We don't want you to be taking medications or supplements that would affect a change in those neurotransmitters because we want to have a very clean sample. We don't want you to exercise before you test. All of that's important in achieving the balance. So we're really looking at the ratios between neurotransmitters. You can have a food that has some of those amino acids in it, and it'll affect the numbers a little bit, but it's not the same as the ratios between, say, serotonin and dopamine. I don't know if you've ever done an experiment like this, but when I was in pharmacy, we were always trying to see how we could affect change in blood work. So we would do a cholesterol reading in our right arm and then our left arm. And those numbers are always going to be slightly different, but the ratio between our good cholesterol and our bad cholesterol was consistent. But over a period of time, if you're implementing something to affect that change, that's what you expect to see, test over test. And so sometimes we have to boost up a little bit of our support, because when you start taking, say, supplementation to affect a change, whether it's your hormones or your neurotransmitters, retesting is so important to see, did we dose high enough? What is your digestion like? Mine might be great and my husband's might be poor. And so we all break things down differently.
So that's where the retest is, where you're watching the patterns, you're watching the shifts, you're watching the
Mhm.
ratios to see what you worked with. Yeah. I remember when I was first, before I even became an FDN, and I had my neurotransmitters tested with a functional doctor, and I was asking a question that a lot of women ask us now. And I said, okay, well, this doesn't seem like it's the root problem, right? Like if my serotonin is off, or, right. So helping balance that with amino acids or whatever protocol, I was questioning, is this actually helping getting to the root cause? And over time, I've seen and I understand, right, that even the fact that with this imbalance, we can't get into deep sleep, for example, or, right, it's this way, it's like a reboot, it's like a reset, that
Mhm.
then the body can start doing its natural thing.
Absolutely. Just like we can't send children off to college with a bunch of supplements, we don't want to have to do that forever either. There are some things, like for example, with my own brain chemistry, I've spent 25 years trying to have a really healthy brain and healthy body. And when I got my genetics panel back, I realized, okay, so I'm compromised when it comes to making neurotransmitters. I'm always going to have to do a little bit of support there, but I'm so grateful to do that over a medication, because I am feeding my body versus causing a side effect that can cause me heart issues in the long run, things like that. But you bet it's a jump start to say, okay, let's heal this. Let's heal the gut and the brain at the same time, and then everything's going to start coming into play. My goal is to reduce, eliminate, so we all have a manageable life that is diet, stress management, exercise, and supplement what you have to,
Yeah,
and
let's talk
medicate if
of
you have to.
yeah, right, for where it's necessary. Okay, I would love to talk about the sleep cycle, Pam, and how we can help support the sleep cycle with balancing the neurotransmitters, and then also what happens when they're out, because a lot of times when our ladies look at their panel and they're like, "Oh, okay, that makes so much sense," right? No matter
Right.
what I do, I'm either some can't fall asleep, some fall asleep but always wake up in the middle of the night, some sleep through 10 hours but don't feel rested. Can you talk a little bit about the role of the neurotransmitters with sleep?
Absolutely. So just like when we wake up in the morning, our adrenal hormones should be at their highest to help us manage the stress of the day. Our neurotransmitters should be in good shape. But if we have this imbalance between the stimulating guys and the calming guys, it's really hard to fall off for a good to fall asleep, but also to stay asleep, because the brain can be awake. I don't know if you've I think we've probably all had it, but you've had those nights where you think, I didn't sleep all night. So your brain was active the entire night. And that's because the stimulating neurotransmitters were activated for some reason. Sometimes, from the get-go, they're very imbalanced. And so we need the calming neurotransmitters to regulate sleep. Serotonin, through a number of pathways, makes melatonin. And so that helps you have a good sleep cycle. But then you also need to be able to have them fall off during the day. We want enough of the stimulating neurotransmitters to have focus, enjoy, and manage our families. But then they have to be able to, one takes over, serotonin and GABA take over at the end of the day for that sleep cycle. And, if we're always running on fight or flight, then the hormones are imbalanced as well. So all of those things have to be equivalent. It's so important when you think about estrogen and progesterone and the way that they affect neurotransmitters. They affect this enzyme that either breaks them down or keeps them from being broken down. So the neurotransmitters have to be balanced in order to have balanced estrogen and progesterone, so that we're breaking down neurotransmitters and keeping the others in place at the same rate.
Okay, so remind me, Pam, I think you said progesterone helps eat them up, right?
Yep.
And
So
then,
progesterone stimulates monoamine oxidase, MAO, to break down neurotransmitters. That's why some women, when they use progesterone only, will get depressed, because it's eating up their neurotransmitters. And then estrogen inhibits the breakdown of neurotransmitters. So folks that are on perhaps an estrogen only birth control pill can get agitated and irritable. Or if the doctor says, oh, you don't need X hormone, because you don't have a uterus or something like that, well, they can take estrogen only, and then they become agitated and irritable as well, instead of just getting them balanced through the different systems.
and this is why right after ovulation, we do have not a ton, but there will be a percentage of women will feel much worse during
Mhm.
that ovulation period.
When you ovulate, dopamine goes up, because dopamine also plays a role with our libido. So dopamine goes up and serotonin drops. That's supposed to make us a little more aggressive to want to mate. And then as dopamine falls off, because we did not conceive several days before your cycle starts, serotonin and dopamine both drop. So we have a lot of young girls and women that will report suicidal ideations right before their period. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to what's happening to me at both of these times. It's so different. Women tolerate low levels of neurotransmitters much less than men do. So men, their testosterone goes up and it just keeps going up till it levels off, in the 30s. And women, we have this up and down every month. And so really important to have a balanced brain to be able to handle that.
Right. And then how does testosterone play in there, Pam?
So testosterone is excitatory in nature, much like estrogen is. It can, of course, it plays a role in libido. It plays a role in our lean muscle mass. We want to have enough testosterone. Too much testosterone can make us appear like a type A personality, or maybe a little more aggression than it should be. So testosterone, the role that it plays with neurotransmitters is much like estrogen.
Okay.
As far as keeping the breakdown of neurotransmitters.
Yeah, breaking it down. Okay. And you said that the most common imbalance you're seeing is between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous
Yeah.
system. And
We
that's
have
one of our
these.
favorite topics. So can you share a little bit about what you're seeing?
Sure. You think about the sympathetic is all the excitatory stuff, like what we're going through with the pandemic. It seems to be there's something new every day. They talked this morning about, we could go into a stage 5 here in Austin. And that's like add a stressor and then go to work. You hear this, and so it causes your brain to respond in a way, and an excitatory play. So the sympathetic system is our excitatory side. And almost everyone, particularly during the pandemic, we're seeing a very activated sympathetic side and not enough parasympathetic. So the calming things that help us sleep good, the things that allow us to respond to stress and stimuli better. The parasympathetic is so important. And I love those graphs that you see where there's the sympathetic on one side where the eyes are dilated and there's so many things going on, and then the other side where it's, calming and the relaxation of the blood vessels. And so we are seeing a big discrepancy now more than ever. But it is the most common thing that causes someone to reach out for help, whether it's with their gut, their brain, or their hormones.
Okay. I think one of the most powerful things of seeing either this panel or whether it's functional hormone testing, but just to actually have the feeling of the way I feel lines up with what I'm seeing on paper, whereas a lot of times their conventional lab work says they're great. And
Yeah,
I
good for
know,
you.
right, like, great, I feel horrible, but everyone says I'm good. So I remember when I saw my very first panel, probably probably 10 years ago now. Whatever ratio, I don't remember, Pam, so maybe you can tell me what this was about, but there was a certain ratio or levels that were related to eating disorders.
Mhm.
And I remember seeing that because in college I had had an eating disorder, and it always bothered me because I actually felt like intellectually this is really dumb, and at the same time couldn't quite stop myself. So to see
Sure.
there was a brain chemistry to this piece and other things too, trauma and that kind of thing, but it can help, I felt at least, take it away from it being somebody's fault or my fault, and there's something I could do.
It's so true. I mean, when you see those numbers in black and white, it's for me, I got my first serotonin level back after working on my brain chemistry for 10 years before this testing became available. And my serotonin was exactly half of what it needed to be. And I thought, okay, this is why I don't sleep. I mean, I used to sleep 2.5 hours at a time, get up, sleep another 2.5 hours later. But I mean, talking about not resting your body, and my hormones were atrocious. I had two premature children. So to finally get these levels, I went, "Oh my goodness, that's so profound." And then, to realize all the areas that it plays a role in. For example, the ratio you were talking about. When you have an imbalance, it the excitatory neurotransmitters can be a runaway train. And I always talk about, I explain to parents, sometimes they have spent thousands of dollars in therapy before they come and do a test with us. And you really cannot behavior modify an imbalanced brain unless it's just pure will. It's just someone just has this constitution, because intellectually we know, like intellectually, I knew I shouldn't be sleeping 2.5 hours. Everyone knows you need 7.5 to 8, right? And as far as the eating disorders, it's almost always a problem with serotonin and dopamine. um, and so eating disorders, it's the same spectrum, from bulimia to obesity to anorexia. We have the same thing when it comes to the spectrum disorders for kids. The same is true from ADD through autism. And, it really does take a balance there so that we can utilize our brain to make the decisions that, hey, I don't want to do that, and actually be able to, versus the brain just being driven by these excitatory neurotransmitters.
And a lot of people, I think, maybe throughout our 20s, or I guess that was just me, but there's alcohol, there's prescription, there's recreational drugs, there's those kind of things that, like you said, when we're younger, we can kind of get away with, meaning we don't feel that horrible, and then that's
Boy,
messing our brain chemistry pretty well, huh?
it really does. And you think about, when you start looking at women's bone density, it often starts waning at about age 35. Well, that's because our hormones, the height of our hormones begin waning, and our stomach acid begins to fall off. So our ability to break down pizza and beer has diminished dramatically by the time we're 35. We can't get the same nutrients. I always wonder, when the young kids come in and they tell me what they've been eating, I'm thinking, and you have beautiful hair and skin. How did that happen? But it's because the stomach acid is good, and the body is very protective of the desire to replicate and to have more children, and so it protects all of that. But yeah, as all of that wanes, everything else does too. So bone density begins to drop in perimenopause, and you see all these other factors too. I answer every day. I answer women, and I've been watching the ages that come through. you know. And right now, the women, born in the 70s, I get a lot of emails from them about digestion issues. So even if they're eating healthfully and they did really well through their 30s, all of a sudden now they're having more problems. They don't have enough enzymes and they need probiotics. And, even with really leading a healthy lifestyle and staying balanced for so many years, it changes.
So you're having everybody start with that healthy diet, right? Rotating proteins, getting enough
Mhm.
adequate fat. And then at that point, the amino acid therapy could be another layer for that.
Yeah, it can bring things back. You kind of go back and think how many people you talked to that said, well, I went off dairy and I didn't feel better. Well, you might not have had gas and bloating, but the effect that it had on your brain chemistry was profound. If you've been having it for 30 years and you suddenly take it out, you don't rejuvenate those neurotransmitters that were depleted from that imbalance for 30 years overnight. It takes a period of time. So, doing the amino acid therapy can jumpstart that. Then, as your gut is healed, you hopefully can reduce supplementation and carry on with your good diet.
Right. So leads into exactly what I wanted to talk about, Pam, is some people are using this more as therapeutic, and then they're in a good place and they can continue on. And some people, you said, like you're maybe needing continued support. How does that look for different people?
I find that the folks that have exceedingly low serotonin, despite being gluten free, probably have some genetic SNPs that are aberrant that would indicate that they're going to need support longer. The folks that maybe started out very young with brain imbalances that were doing different medications for them might be more of a lifetime person. I don't take all of my amino acids every day. I can take some of them 3 times a week now because you don't want to replace everything. You want to get as much from your diet and just support that. Just the same with your good fats. You just want to do a little bit more. Genetic testing is fascinating. Those genes are not always turned on. So it's not the be all end all, right? It's just a guidance. For me, it was kind of like, okay, you've spent 25 years working on things. How accurate were your assessments? And and that was helpful to see. So it doesn't make me feel bad that I couldn't get on top of it. Um, and most of us, particularly in the US, we're a very combined culture, the melting pot. So we have very unique genes compared to some of the purer cultures. I look at genes from folks around the world, and there are some very specific things that we see with our Asian clients versus some of our German clients and Haitian clients, and so we see all kind of differences. But Americans as a whole have the most trouble with serotonin of any country that we've experienced. A lot of that's due to our food.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And when you look at the German, the European panels, because they have so many holidays, they on average have 20 holidays in addition to their month or 2 months that they have off for vacation. Their stress levels are so vastly different. The more westernized they become, more like America, the worse their brain chemistry is getting too.
Oh boy, Pam.
I know.
So one of the things I love about this test as well is that you can take it while on all sorts of things, right? Like you could be on an antidepressant, you could be supporting your body with whatever you're doing. So you can see where you are, because a lot of people don't want to come off what they're on. They just want to see what their current levels are on it.
Exactly. And because it's just a single urine sample in the morning, it makes it easy. So that morning, you just don't drink more than 8 ounces of water and you have, a basic breakfast that doesn't involve meat because I don't want to measure cow serotonin or pig serotonin. I want to measure yours. And then as soon as you've taken your sample, then you take everything that you normally take whatever supplements or medications that you need to, because many times, folks have think how many steps they've gone through before they found you, and so you've done a few things and each point you feel a little bit better, but you want to go to the next step. And so we certainly don't want to undo some of that for a
Agreed.
test.
Agreed. Once I found this test, I was not going back, Pam. I love it. Our ladies love it. So thank you so much. This has been so informative. Anything else you want to share? Where we can find you? Any
Well,
other
you can
details?
find us at neurogistics.com, but you need a clinician. So it's a great way to go. And, we can give extra data to your clinician there that'll help. Like, maybe you've got low iron if your glutamate's low, things like that. But I really appreciate you having me on, and I hope that folks got a little bit more information about brain chemistry today.
Yes, this is fabulous. So our next group of healthy hormones where we use this panel will be in February. I believe February 8th is our next start date. So we can put that link in the show notes and just reach out to us if you have any further questions. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.